Are you a businesswoman who is finding it challenging to get your ideas across and make a point? Welcome to Speakers Who Get Results with Elizabeth Bachman, a podcast dedicated to helping women get the visibility they want, whether making a speech or talking in a meeting. Every week, get valuable lessons from Elizabeth or learn from her roundtable conversations with experts and speakers on how to make a difference, not just a point. On to the show with your host, Elizabeth Bachman.
Hello and welcome to Speakers Who Get Results. I'm Elizabeth Bachman, your host, and this is the podcast where we interview experts from around the world on subjects such as presentation skills, visibility, leadership, and how really to be seen for the value that you bring. Before I get into the conversation with our guest today, I'd like to invite you to see how your presentation skills are doing by taking our free 4-minute assessment at speakforresultsquiz.com. That's www.speakforresultsquiz.com. And that's where you can see where your presentation skills are strong and where perhaps a little bit of support could get you the results you need and the recognition that you deserve. My guest today is public relations specialist Lisa Simone Richards. Lisa is based in Canada, but works with clients mostly in North America. And one of the things that I wanted to ask her was how you can use PR to appear on television, in magazines, on radio, why it matters, and how do you find the time to do it? It's worth investing a little bit of time so that once you know what you want to do, you could do it at a moment's notice. Because, of course, being in the media, you have to be ready at a moment's notice. But if you take a little time to prepare, you can actually do that. The official bio with Lisa is Lisa Simone Richards is a publicist working mostly for doctors and health professionals these days, but who has spent many years with various brands and in the fitness and fashion industry. She helps subject matter experts become regular guest experts on TV, top-rated podcasts, and other major media. After working with her, Lisa's clients are recognized as industry thought leaders and can add an extra comma to their annual revenue and increase the it factor of a sold-out personal brand. This is one of the reasons why I wanted to ask Lisa about this, because she's really good at helping you position yourself as the expert, which of course is the best way to be visible and valued. Lisa's brand experience includes Virgin Mobile, Staples, Crayola, and more. She gives consummate experts access to the same PR strategies that the international multi-million-dollar companies are using to scale their businesses. Her clients often start by getting press on national media, including Fox, NBC, Forbes magazine, and more during their first 30 days of working with her. And on weekends, you can find her playing in the kitchen with her husband, petting all the dogs in the park, and watching way too many fashion styling videos on YouTube. Had a delightful conversation with Lisa Simone Richards. Here we go. Lisa Simone Richards, welcome to Speakers Who Get Results.
Thank you so much for having me, and I'm so excited for our conversation today.
Yes, exactly. We met recently, and I said, "Ooh, got to get her on the show." Absolutely. So that's going to be fun. Before I dive into the many useful things you have to say, let me ask you, who would be your dream interview? If you were going to interview somebody who's no longer with us, who would it be? What would you ask them? And who should be listening? Basically, who have you always wanted to have a conversation with?
I think something that's coming up that's very relevant to the moment. The person I would be for me is Princess Diana. I
Oh,
would be
okay.
so curious to, especially with everything going on with the book releases and the Netflix shows right now.
So
It would be so.
let me just quickly say, we're recording this in January of 2023. Prince Harry has just released a book about more or less why he left the royal family. And there's a Netflix deal and so forth. So if you don't follow the royal family of Britain, that's what it's about.
Yes. I would say the royal theme is top of mind right now. So it was interesting watching The Crown and seeing Diana's version of events fictionalized, but it would be very interesting to have a conversation with her.
Very interesting. Certainly she knew a lot about publicity and, the good and the bad. Yeah. Would you have taken her as a client with all the things we know about her now?
No, that's too, no, I like I like PR that's relatively chill, crisis communications. I will acknowledge I'm very good at crisis communications, but it's not the fuel I want to be running on all day.
Right. I know you've done a lot in the fashion space and pop culture, but you've also are working mostly with doctors or specialists, really. This relates to anybody who is a subject matter expert. One of the smart things you've done is position yourself with a niche, which doesn't mean you don't work with other people, but talk a little bit about choosing a niche, who to talk to. And those of you in corporate jobs who are listening, this will be relevant, so stay with us.
I think if you say, I can help anyone, then it's hard for people to really place, oh, well, she's good with anyone. And the truth is, a lot of the work that all of us do could probably support so many people. Yes. But when we niche ourselves in a position in a specific way, it makes it so much easier for someone to identify, oh, I could work with her. Or it makes it so much easier for someone to refer me. They're like, oh, Lisa, I know you work with doctors. I actually know this doctor who's looking for X, Y, Z. And it's easy to connect me with them. So there's always the position of who I work with and what I do. But on the back end, I have a lot of different brands coming my way and asking for support that I work with. So it may not be publicized, but that is what's happening.
Yeah. Well, and part of what I find with my clients, especially the high level women in corporate, is that having a PR agent help you, first of all, it saves you time, and getting on the media, getting out there and being heard, knowing what to say is one thing. Finding the gigs is really time consuming. And so having someone who specializes in that is very important.
It's great to have someone who can really understand what your end goal is when it comes to visibility, whether you're looking to get in front of an audience that's going to buy from you, or you're looking to actually gain and establish credibility, position yourself as an authority and an expert so that you're commanding respect. So it's nice to have an understanding of what that intention is so that somebody like me is able to say, great, if this is the desired result that you want from the outcome, here are my recommendations of where it makes sense for you to be seen and the message for you to be delivering, so that we can create that result that you're intentionally putting yourself out there to create.
Great. Talk more about the value of positioning yourself as an authority, actively positioning yourself as an authority.
So we have to remember the psychological that goes along with it. Think about when you're looking to try a new restaurant, or maybe you're looking at purchasing something. If you log on to the website or you see on a storefront, as seen on NBC, Fox, Forbes, whatever those logos might be, without even seeing the news piece, without even reading an article, psychologically, you're like, oh, okay, if this person got featured in these places, they must know what they're talking about, because Forbes isn't just going to feature a nobody or somebody who doesn't know what they're discussing.
And you're talking about Forbes, the magazine, for the international listeners, the business magazine.
Yes. So just having those as seen on logos is something that automatically positions you. It's something that within a few seconds, it changes the way that people perceive you. I can always remember when I first started my business in 2015, bless my mother, who is my biggest cheerleader in the world, but she was very much like, Lisa, maybe you should go get your master's degree. Maybe you should work for another job first. And I actually got featured in a magazine for my business. It was a 4-page spread. I did a shoot with a photographer. And when I gave her that magazine, that was the moment that she was like, she can do this. Not that she didn't know that. My mom is fully aware of my education, the clients that I worked with in the past, but there was something about that tangible moment for her to see it that created that belief. So when you can do the same thing for yourself, think about, I'm always thinking about what is the other person going to see or think. And that's a really quick way to create that shift of how you're perceived.
That's actually very important for the strategy part of visibility, so raising your visibility to show your value, because there's nothing like getting printed in, getting printed on an online source, a respected online source, and then sharing it to make your colleagues go, wow, Lisa's in the Harvard Business Review? I didn't know she knew all that. So that sort of thing.
And one thing that I find even interesting beyond how other people see you when you get featured somewhere is the confidence that you have in yourself. When you see that magazine spread, when you see yourself on television, because I think a lot of the time we might take our own gifts for granted, but when we see it from that third party perspective, it's like, oh, I do know what I'm talking about. Oh, I did do a great interview. And there's also not only that external shift, but an internal one as well.
Good. And actually, that's very important. That's actually one of the reasons why, if you work with a professional, they can say, yes, this is awesome. I've got various people that I work with, and sometimes I'll say, is this a thing? Should I be talking about that? And they go, yeah, there's nobody else talking about this. You should be. Absolutely. You should be talking about this. And then the coaches I have hired and the trainers I have hired have taught me. That's the other thing, is to learn to be aware, to notice, oh, this might be something that's worth talking about. And so that the more you do it, the more you can do it for yourself, and then say, oh, I should do a podcast episode about that, for instance. Lisa, this is probably a good time. I've got two big questions for you. The first one is, Lisa, let me ask you about why it's worth being out speaking in public, from your point of view, why it's worth working with a PR expert if you actually have a job.
A lot of the time, we're looking to move up the corporate ladder. And sometimes one thing that happens to a lot of my clients is they start off by proactively looking for opportunities. But how cool is it when things reactively fall in your lap? So let's say you're speaking on a stage in your industry about your subject matter expertise, or maybe you're talking about it on a podcast and somebody else sees that. That could be a job opportunity opening up for you because somebody wants to chat with you after. Talking from a media perspective, I had clients who got on television, a national show, and a radio producer was watching it. And that radio producer called the office later and asked them to come on the radio show. A magazine editor saw that segment as well and called the office and asked the client if they could write an article for their magazine. And those just came to them. They didn't have to do anything for it. And by extension of that, it amplified the number of people who saw them. It amplified the number of logos they had backing them. So putting yourself out there for these opportunities also has things reactively fall in your lap as well.
That's right. So that you actually have opportunities. You don't have to spend the time looking for the opportunities once you've built up enough momentum.
And I think that's really important to say, if I can come back to that, because I even think about my own career speaking on stages across Canada and the States. From 2017 through 2019, I spent a lot of time looking up the right stages, applying to speak at various events. Sometimes I wouldn't get the main stage, maybe I'd get a fireside chat. But fast forward to around 2020, 2021, I wasn't doing the applications anymore. I had relationships and people were coming to me saying, hey, Lisa, this is our event. Are you available to speak? This is what the rate is. It's really nice to have that come to you.
Yes. Which makes me ask, one of my favorite ways of finding places to speak is to talk to other speakers, the people we've made relationships. Talk a little bit about the value of those relationships and how do you find the right opportunities?
You never know who knows someone who knows somebody else. And especially if you're speaking on a stage and they're speaking on a stage, you're all probably doing similar events as well. So to be able to have that warm introduction to a meeting planner, rather having to, pitch to them from scratch, is so powerful when someone can just do a really casual conversation. Hey, there's this event coming up. You should chat with Lisa. So to be able to be in the green room before you step on stage and connect with the other speakers, follow them on social media, add them on LinkedIn, keep the conversation going long after you've stepped off the stage. Because even thinking back to speaking in Los Angeles back in, I think it was July I was there are contacts that I met from an event and we are chatting on Instagram and they're mentioning things that could be a good opportunity for me. So it's so cool to see from that 45 minutes of interaction with 3 other individuals, something like 6 months ago, we're still talking and sharing.
That's great. Yes, that's how you build things. I always say that the best resource for speaking gigs is other speakers.
Absolutely. And it's so amazing that they know of events that I do my research to find what could be relevant, and they'll mention things I've never come across before. So the power of building that network, like how awesome is it that you're building your own presence on stage, you're getting in front of new audience, you're meeting the meeting planners, but also connecting with the other speakers as well. And all of that is in exchange for 45 or 60 minutes of your time.
Yes. Well, and probably a good time to point out here that if you want to get from, say, director or senior director to vice president or C-level, you have to position yourself as a strategic thinking. Most people can get up to director more or less through skill and ability, but then you have to position yourself as a leader and a strategic thinker. And that's where speaking outside your organization is one of the best ways of doing it.
And especially when other people can see you, like imagine one of your competitors is watching you speak on stage. Like that almost makes you a little more valuable to your current employer, knowing that a competitor is watching and might want to poach you. It gives you an incentive to hang on to you. So sometimes I always think about when you're looking to hire someone, and I know that we're talking to people who are entrepreneurs versus running their own companies, but if you were to hire, let's say, a life coach, if you had the budget, would you hire Tony Robbins or Joe Blow around the corner? Like you probably want to go for the person who has a bigger presence, that they're well known. So think about doing your own internal branding that way as well.
Well, it's also because so often people come to me and they say, all right, I can talk about what I do at the office, but I'm really passionate about this problem. My industry needs to pay attention to this problem. And so how do I get out and speak about that? Which is actually some of the most fun stuff to work on. Is that's where you start building your thought leadership. I get subject matter expert.
Exactly what I was going to say. It shows that you're not just somebody who knows how to do a job. You're somebody who is forward thinking. You're someone who anticipates, somebody who sees trends. And that's really valuable.
And that's what you need at the higher levels. Yeah. You might actually, one of the things that you can do is actually say it. If you know that you're being thought of as the worker. I had a wonderful client who worked for a major manufacturing company, a very famous brand. And because she was one of the few women in the tech space, she was always being asked to come and speak as a woman at the tech things. But she wanted to be a strategic thing. She was a strategic thinker and she wasn't seen that way. And so what we had her do was when she started out, she would do the speech, but she would start it by saying, I know you invited me here because of my tech skills and because I can do all of this stuff, but really I'm a strategic thinker. So I'm going to talk about the strategic thinking behind this. And that is what actually one of the board members heard that speech and called up the CEO and say, hey, did you know that Priya was talking about all of this? Very impressive. And with a recommendation from the board, she got that promotion.
That's such a powerful story.
Let me ask you, I know you talk about the ABCs of publicity. What are they?
So this is where it comes back to intention. And we actually started to talk about this a little bit at the beginning of our conversation. Anytime I work with a client, I want to understand what is the purpose of getting this visibility. It's fantastic to be seen. It's nice to collect the as seen on logos, but what is the end game? So it comes down typically to A, B, or C. And I'm sure the listeners could find themselves in one of these three. And I'm willing to bet, I think I know which one most of them are going to fall into. So A stands for building awareness. This is a lot of the time when you want to get in front of your ideal, for entrepreneurs, it's their ideal client, the person who's going to hire them. This is when the person that you want to work with needs to know about you and that you exist, because you can't be the best kept secret.
Right.
B stands for buzz. So let's say you're about to launch something. Let's say a movie's coming out. You don't just hear about the movie once. It is all over the place. The actors are on Entertainment Tonight, Access Hollywood. Somebody's probably in a new relationship or just broke up. There is a buzz going around that has everyone talking about it. Probably why I came up with the Princess Diana answer at the beginning of this conversation. There's so much buzz. C stands for credibility. And this is where I think a lot of the listeners are going to find value. Credibility is when you want to get into the same room as the experts and the mentors and the coaches that you have hired. You want to be seen at that level. So this is now where you're paying attention within your industry and you want to be one of those names. You want to be the Tony Robbins or whatever that name might be. So this is now where it's going to be maybe like a trade publication. Let's say you're a director of marketing. Maybe you're looking at a marketing magazine, a marketing conference. So it's not getting in front of the consumer, but you're actually building your credibility, your thought leadership, and your expert status by being featured in these places.
You also, when we talked about this earlier, when we were setting up this interview, you were talking about industry awards. I mentioned it to a client who said, yes, but I can't nominate myself, or can you?
It certainly depends on the award that's being presented. There are some you can absolutely present yourself for. You could also nudge a colleague or somebody else you know in the industry to ask if they would be willing to nominate you. There are other awards that are going to be voted on by the consumers, not typically in this conversation that you and I are having today, but there are different ways to approach it. And I'm willing to bet that anybody in an industry probably has one or two colleagues that they could nudge and ask if they could put their name forward for them.
How do you do that without bragging? How do you do that without being that obnoxious bragging person?
I mean,
I have an answer, but I want to hear what you want.
Acknowledge ourselves that we're good with something. You know, I think it all comes from the approach. So many times we're working on being humble, but we can actually just put our hands up and say, hey, you know what? I'm actually really good at something, and I'd love to be highlighted for it. I will pat myself on the back and not so humble brag, say that I'm amazing at getting people on television. People I work with within 30 days will do their first segment. Some of my clients have done 60 segments without having been on television before. So yeah, I might put myself out for some sort of publicity award because I can help more people when people know that I exist and I'm good at that skill. So I think there's a way that we can frame it.
Now, you mentioned being on television, which takes me to the next question I had for you. How can you find the time to be ready when there's a trending topic and you're the person who should be speaking? Let's talk. How do you take people through this?
Yeah, I love this question. I think especially when it comes to trending topics, let's say you work in marketing, let's say you work in pharmaceuticals, whatever your industry is, something that I like to do is go on Google, type in the word of that industry. And you know how when you get the results, it'll show shopping, images, video, news, etc. I click on the news feed and see what's the conversation in this industry. And something that's really interesting, especially from a television perspective, is that producers, the people behind the cameras, behind the scenes who are planning what you're watching on television, they have a lot of FOMO. So I have a friend who used
what's FOMO for our international listeners?
Fear of missing out. Okay. Fear of missing out. So I have a friend who was a producer and an on-air reporter for a television show, and she shared with me that they would have their post-episode meetings. Let's say she worked for ABC. I'm making this up. They would be in their production meeting, and the executive producer would be like, ABC was talking about this. How come we didn't cover it? So when you can see, oh, this is a trending topic in the industry, I'll go to a television producer and be like, hey, a lot of people are talking about XYZ. I saw it on this station, thought I could bring it here with a different spin. And that gets their wheels going like, oh God, there's a conversation happening. We're behind it. Someone's here to bring us a different perspective. So that's my hack with coming up with something newsworthy that's going to get their attention.
Could you have 3 or 4 short nuggets ready that would fit? Can you pre-write things and then sort of have your talking points, and then you can just adapt them when something comes up?
Sure. I often think about newsworthy content versus evergreen content.
Okay.
So when it's evergreen, it's a little bit easier to have those points already mapped out and just talk about the same content over and over again. When it's something that's a little more newsworthy, kind of digging back to that evergreen content and seeing what you can tie in, because some principles are always going to be relevant. And the other thing I would want to say, just because we are talking about television, is to keep in mind, depending on what television show you are going for, we have to remember that television has more of a general audience. Let's say you're going for a morning news show versus, let's say, a podcast. It's very specific with a specific listener in mind. Mm-hmm. So if one of my clients says to me, I'd like to be on morning television talking about, let's say, workouts for new moms, which could fly, but I have to be like, remember, we're eliminating 50% of the audience as soon as we make it about moms. So we also have to think about, based on who's paying attention to this medium. So we're giving them content that is going to be relevant to their audience.
Boy, that's where I'm going to want help with that, because I always think, I think about I don't know if anybody else listening is the kind of person who thinks about the perfect thing to say 2 days after the stories left the publicity. I need someone like you who's paying attention. How about the time it takes to be ready for something like this?
Oh, I have an answer to that one. And my answer about the timing, here's what's really interesting about the media. They're not necessarily working with the best person in any area. They're working with the person who is 2 things that my mother, who I just saw a few minutes ago, always asked me never to be. They're working with the person who is the fastest and the easiest. So if you respond to emails quickly, if you say, hey, if you have a question, feel free to text me. If you're that person who's super resourceful and can send them sources, they are going to work with you. There's a resource out there called Help a Reporter Out. HARO.com, for those people who may not be familiar with it. And with HARO, Help a Reporter Out, they send out queries from reporters who are looking for experts to codify their stories. We need a quote from a doctor, from a CEO on this subject. And some people will spend so much time thinking about what the right answer to say is. And I'm always like, you know what, be the first person to respond to that, come up with something that makes sense. You can come up with something better later, but they're not going to go through hundreds of responses to see which the best one is. One of the first 5 people who respond to them is probably the person who's going to get that opportunity. So be fast, be easy. Those are the most important things. Once you get the in, then you have some time to be a little more thoughtful with what content you're going to provide in your answers, but don't spend too much time thinking about the content first, because the opportunity can pass along to not necessarily someone who's better than you, but somebody who is faster.
And here again, this is where I would delegate somebody to pay attention to this for me, and then say, hey, so that I don't have to deal with it, because I have a business to run, and I'm working in an organization. I'm in meetings all day, every day, all week. But if you've got someone who's paying attention, who can then ping you and say, hey, there's an opportunity, you should be talking about this. I did this with a client not too long ago, where who talks about why companies aren't updating their technical resources. And we had the whole mess with Southwest Airlines. Again, I'm recording this in January of 2023, and Southwest Airlines had their systems crash during the holiday travel season. So I got my client out there to talk about that, because I know that's something she's got good things to say about. And she actually hadn't really thought. I said, wait, you should be talking about this. Every once in a while, I'm the person that has the idea, usually for somebody else. But Lisa, let me ask you another question about building your credibility, which of course, that's sort of the people want to say, oh yeah, I've heard of her somewhere. What else can we do in terms of building credibility without spending too much time if we are working 7 days a week and, probably getting our actual work done on the weekends because we're in meetings all the time? How can you shorten the process?
So here's how I might reverse engineer that. I would start by thinking, where could I get featured that would instantly create credibility for me? What is the publication, the podcast, the stage, the newspaper, whatever it might be? Where could I get featured? So let's say for somebody in business, that could be Harvard Business Review, like you mentioned. It could be Forbes. I would go onto those websites and I would narrow down what is the section that would make the most sense for me. We know if we go on Forbes.com, for example, there's like small business, there's women in business, there's marketing, there are different areas. Narrow down which one of those sections would make the most sense for you. Click on that section and open it up, and you're going to see a list of articles that have recently come out. Scan through the names on that and see if there's one name that keeps showing up over and over again. Let's say, maybe there's one person who's authored 4 articles on that page. That gives you a hint that this is a person who has the ins to get me in on this site. Let me see if I can figure out how to contact them and give them an idea for a story. That would be the fastest way of reverse engineer it.
That's great. And here again, for something like this is where you want to take the time to focus on your long-term results, because it's so easy to open up your email first thing in the morning, and then you spend the whole day dealing with other people's asks, other people's requests. This is why I hire people, frankly, to help me with this, because it's only when someone's sitting there across from me or sitting there on the Zoom to say, what do you really want to do? That's the only thing that makes me do that. But that's me. I don't do anything without. I'm an Olympic class procrastinator, so I don't do anything without accountability.
We all have our systems. I know for me, I've got to get things done before I check emails, or else I'm going to be putting out other fires all day versus starting off intentionally with what I would create today.
And one of the things that I try to do is reserve a 2-hour section every week, a 2-hour session where I am working on a long-term something with my phone off. I'm working and I'm not on Wi-Fi. I'm working on, or at least with the email program is off. So if I'm on Wi-Fi researching, I don't have the email open, because I know that once I do that, I'm lost. So, Lisa, this has been so interesting. If somebody really wants to get more publicity and wants to get help, what's the first thing we can do? What's the first action we can take?
The first thing I would say is always go back to the ABCs of visibility, like we talked about before, and get clear on the intention.
Those are awareness, buzz, and credibility, right?
Such a good student. Yes, very clear notes.
I wrote it down. I'm taking notes here. Yes.
Yeah, get crystal clear on what the point of visibility is, because I can't tell you, I'll give you a little bit of a story here and I'll make this concise. So I used to work in the fitness industry. I was doing PR for a fitness company. I ended up becoming a trainer and an instructor, but that's besides the point. But it's very interesting that I'll have so many studio owners come to me and want to work with me. And they'll say, Lisa, I have a gym and I work with people who are going to the gym for the first time, women who are going for the first time, for example. And I would love to be featured in strong muscle and fitness, the hardcore bodybuilding magazines. And I have to share with them, like, if you get featured there, that's going to build your credibility, but it's not going to satisfy your objective of getting people who are going to the gym for the first time, because someone who's going to the gym for the first time is not reading a hardcore muscle building magazine. They're maybe going through Self or Shape or something a little more gentle like that. So that's an example of someone who could get visibility, but it absolutely wouldn't serve the purpose. So getting clear on that intention is always the first thing, because you can get the visibility, but not get the result. That's true.
Lisa, this has been wonderful having you here on the show. Thank you so very much. And I will post all sorts of links about how to find her. She's very visible, as she should be. And thank you. I hope this has been very useful for me. It's giving me notes of things I need to do for my visibility. So thank you for joining us.
Thank you so much, Elizabeth. And I hope that everyone listening knows, even if you're working inside of an organization, amplify yourself, position yourself, get seen as that subject matter expert. And hey, if you love your job, stay. But who knows what else might come falling out of the sky at you too.
Exactly. This has been Speakers Who Get Results. I'm Elizabeth Bachman, your host. If you enjoyed this conversation, please tell your friends, subscribe to us, and rate us on Apple Podcasts. That's the one that matters. You can follow us on YouTube, and we'll have all the links wherever you're listening to this. This has been Elizabeth Bachman. I'll see you on the next one.
We have just concluded another great episode of Speakers Who Get Results with your host, Elizabeth Bachman. If you got value from today's episode, please feel free to share us with your friends and colleagues. You may also visit elizabethbachman.com for additional resources. Be sure to tune in every week for new episodes, and thanks for tuning in.